Hi folks, I think we'll get started. We're over 130 people, expecting about 50 more. Welcome to the Open University's Reading for Pleasure newsletter live, kind of a magazine program of pop-up moments when TRG leaders and visitors share some of the work they're doing. I expect you've seen the program. It runs like this. And there's lots of different colleagues sharing from Cornwall right to Scotland. And our best bit of the evening that I'm looking forward to most, at least, no rudeness to anybody else, is to listen to Marcia being interviewed by John Biddle, who sent such a fabulous pile of questions that I wanted to be answering them myself, if only I'd written such brilliant books. But anyway, welcome to you all. Thank you for joining us. I'm going to start, unusually not with the story, there isn't time. I'm going to start with a poem. And I chose, well, two from Poems Aloud by Joe Chalo, illustrated by Daniel Gray Barnett. One of the pages says, "Say how you feel." When I'm sad, it feels like the sky is crashing down, like the oceans are rising and the ground is swallowing me up. All is dark and cold. But when I'm happy, my cheeks feel like rosebuds, my tummy glows with sunlight, and my shoulders are a forest breeze. Isn't that fabulous last line? My shoulders are a forest breeze. And then in the next book I've chosen to share a single poem from is a rather fascinating new collection written by a 4-year-old, at least they're his words, Nadim's words. He lives, I think, or has a mother who lives near or knows Kate Clanchy, the poet. And Kate met the mother and is a friend of the mother, and the mother was talking about how Nadim has a lot to say and she wanted to somehow capture it. So Kate said, well, just write his words down and read them back to him. Let him be the young poet. And so this, Scared Sugar, are Nadim's words. Did you ever have that feeling that you were scared about doing something scary, but it was also kind of sweet? Like the first time you meet new friends, like touching a sea anemone, like sleeping over at your cousin's house, like eating a new food, like becoming 5 instead of 4, like saying bye to your mum when you go to a new school. You would feel nervous but excited, and that's a feeling called scared sugar. For scared sugar things, you put on your brave, and you can take it off again when you realize it's okay, and that's it. Scary and sweet. Scared sugar. Such wonderful language from a young man who's sharing his view of the world. I'm going to pass over now then to Lucy Rodriguez, who's going to give you some update on the news.
Thank you, Teresa. So firstly, in OURfP news, entries are open until the 9th of May for the annual Reading for Pleasure Awards. In their 4th year now, the awards are a partnership between the Open University, the UK Literacy Association and Farshawe Publishers, who were formerly Egmont. This year, there's a new award category for Community Reading Champion. So if you know someone in your school who just goes that extra mile to build communities of readers beyond the school gate, then do encourage them to enter and be recognised for their work. As before, the winners of each category will receive books to the value of £250 for their school. Now, in the week of the 14th to the 18th of June this year, pop-up festivals are launching their first live stream literature festival. And this event is free to all schools in the UK, and it'll be a week-long celebration of some of the best writers and illustrators for children and young adults. The event will feature over 20 authors and include interviews, performances, workshops, and you can find details of that at popup.org.uk. Now, we were really inspired to hear about the work of the organisation Book Clubs in Schools. This organisation provides training for Year 11 pupils who then organise and lead book clubs for Year 7s. The leaders receive some training to help them steer a constructive discussion. They encourage the younger pupils to debate the book, engage in critical thinking, and to express opinions. The details of that can be found at bookclubsinschools.org. And lastly, don't forget that Empathy Day 2021 is on the 10th of June. Empathy Lab website has all the details of Empathy Day Live, which this year is going to be an online programme of creative activities with authors, illustrators and poets. So it would be absolutely great if we can get everyone involved in making empathy resolutions this year. And then, of course, there's lots more about OURfP events, initiatives and new resources in the news section of the website. So do check in there regularly for all the latest news. And
thanks, Lucy. Fabulous. Just to say, Rich Charlesworth is very kindly putting links to all the things that are mentioned and indeed the books in the chat line. So if you're thinking, what's Lucy going on about? Empathy Lab, Empathy Day, I didn't hear it, didn't catch it, then have a look in the chat line and do introduce yourself. I'm now handing over to Abina Apaya from TRG Leader in Newham. Over to you. Top texts, let's hear them.
Hi everyone. The first text I'm going to talk about is The Poet X by Azevedo. If you have not read a book that's written in verse before, then this will be a really, really good place to start. In this book, Azevedo follows the story of Xiomara. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it correctly with my Spanish, Xiomara. And in this text, Azevedo explores the theme of acceptance, sexism, sexuality, and it really delves into Xiomara's relationship with the church and the rejection of religion through by exploring three different parts. Firstly, it explores Xiomara's relationship with the church through submission, rebellion, and then finally liberation.
You've got about a minute left. Go for it.
Okay, my second text is The Art of Breathing by Sarah Alexander, and she uses the theme of family and grief. And interestingly, she uses the dangerous sport of free diving to really explore what it feels like in terms of grieving. So I really recommend this book. And the last book is Clap When You Land, again by Elizabeth Azevedo. And in this book, she adopts the alternative narrative point. So we hear from two of the main characters at the same time. And in it, again, she explores the theme of sexual assault, grief, sisterhood, betrayal. She also explores cultural identity in this, all within the central themes of grief and empathy. I personally think that the alternating points of view is a technique that really allows the reader to really get into the inner thoughts of both characters. So these are my top texts that I'm recommending to you today.
Thank you, Abina. Lovely. I'm going back to our screen to find out what's coming next. I hope we don't spend too much money in it here. We're passing over now. Can everybody see that? Yes? John, can you nod at me? Can you see that screen? Yeah, sorry, I couldn't tell. Don't seem to be able to move on. It's not wanting me to move. It's not allowing me to move. Yes, it is. Good, hooray. Passing over now to Claire Williams, who's going to share an example of practice that she's been working on. Over to you, Claire.
Thank you, Teresa. The first thing to say is I've uploaded several examples of practice to the website. It's a really, really easy way of developing and sharing your practice and being able to have a positive influence on, I suppose, on primary education and secondary education if you're secondary, beyond your classroom and school community, which is a really rewarding thing to do. And also inform critical reflection on your journey as a teacher as you're developing your practice. It's a really great way of supporting that. I am going to give you an overview of one of the examples of practice that I've written. So I'm reading lead for our trust, but I'm also outdoor learning and forest school lead. And this example of practice really was a journey that the children and I went on together. They came to me one day and they said, like, you're in charge of reading and you're in charge of outdoor learning and you're in charge of forest school, but we don't read at forest school. Can we do that? So this really came from them. And I then went to the teachers as readers research as a way of thinking, okay, so the children are asking for a new reading space, they're asking to create a new reading environment. I need to think about what I can do to support that and make sure that it has the maximum impact on their reading pleasure and their enjoyment as readers. I want to emphasise here as well that although this example was set at forest school, this would work in any outdoor space. So don't feel like if you've not got a forest school at your school that you can't do this. We've done the same in the school grounds, on the school field, all different kinds of outdoor spaces. So I went to the research, and the first thing it talked about was the importance of physically and socially engaging reading spaces, of us having a knowledge of children's reading practices as teachers, and importantly of giving children choice and ownership when we're creating new social reading environments. And that underpinned everything that we did. The children had ownership from the very beginning, so we started with a meeting where we discussed their vision for this reading space. I was an equal in that conversation, but although they were taking ownership of it, I drew on the research to make sure that I was scaffolding their thinking and their choices and the decisions they were making as we went. They knew that it was being developed and shaped with them. So the first session, they knew it wasn't the finished kind of structural product, that we were working on it together to develop it into the space that they wanted it to be. Important for them and top of their agenda was comfort and being able to relax. They talked about finding dark corners, about kind of burrowing into dens, about reading with torches. Importance for them of having a diverse range of texts and recommendations. And although I had to continue be assessing risk because they were up trees and all kinds of different things, I was reading alongside them where I could as well. And interestingly, it was about all their suggestions were mirroring practices and preferences that we saw in the classroom, and then that was being transferred into the outdoor learning environment too. One of the things that was interesting is they asked if we could have it so that they had no set time to be reading, so they could either be constructing a den or reading. And I was interested in whether that would reveal genuine engagement. Would they spend the whole time building dens, or would they actually be reading? And I really had to kind of hold my nerve during the first few sessions because not much reading was happening. There was a lot of moving about and not much settling down to reading, even children that are normally really settled in the classroom. I resisted the temptation, and the pattern that followed within the kind of 4th and 5th sessions, they were going straight off to their space that they'd found. And I thought the use of possessive adjectives in some of the quotes and the things I was overhearing was interesting. So I'm off to my tree. I hope our den is still how I left it. And because I trusted them to find their spaces and I didn't limit the time that they were taking to do that, they then took more and more ownership of the places that they were going off to read. Movement tended to be determined by the text they were reading. So some of them would always go off and read independently. Some of them would always be part of a social group and be sharing texts together. And the type of text they were reading, I found, was really important in terms of where they were choosing to go and who they were choosing to read with. Reflecting on the consequence of our actions on readers, the difference that I noticed, interestingly, who they were with was as important as the space itself. So those two kind of went hand in hand. What they were reading and what that determined in terms of who they were with was critical in terms of where they then chose to read. And the freedom and the ownership and giving them time were fundamental in supporting the changes in their engagement and stamina that we saw. So not limiting the levels of movement, even though very little time was spent reading at the beginning, was really, really critical in terms of that improvement in their engagement later on. I just want to reiterate again that this could be any outdoor space. So although this was with a specific club, my class and I are out on the field quite a lot. We're in the reflections garden and it's been the same there. There's quite a lot of movement at the beginning. Regularity is key, because once you're doing it regularly and consistently, they then take ownership of the reading spaces. They know where they're going, and that's when the engagement and the enjoyment really come through. Yeah, and that's it. So the
sounds great.
Yeah.
Thanks, Claire. Just a lovely way to encourage reading. Let's hope we get some decent weather and we can take the children outdoors.
Well, they still want to go in the rain. Even when it's raining, they're out there. So weather doesn't seem to put them off.
Great. Thank you so much. I'm moving on now to have a secondary example of practice shared by Hannah Grace. Over to you, Hannah.
Hi everyone, I'm Hannah. I'm the Key Stage 3 lead and the Halzo and TRG leader. I've been doing a lot of work this year and last year on widening the reading repertoires of our Year 7 readers. And this is inspired by the Teachers as Readers framework, particularly teachers' knowledge, children's reading practices, and helping the students find themselves as readers and share their reading identities. I wanted to find out with a particular Year 7 group what motivated Year 7 readers, expose them to a wide range of texts, and also create opportunities to really explore shared reading and develop those books in common. So starting off, what I did was I used the fantastic surveys on the website to establish my baseline. I found out that supported my sort of observations of the class that lots of them at the moment weren't very keen readers. They certainly weren't very keen to read independently, or didn't have very positive experiences and reflections of reading. I dug a little bit deeper and I noticed a pattern in what they were telling me, and lots of them were talking about how they were struggling to find the right book. And I guess that was the light bulb moment, and I sought then to find lots of opportunities to help them find the books that might speak to them. So we've done lots with this particular group. One of the things that's been fantastically successful is forming a reading connection with our book pen pal. So Teresa, if you don't mind just going to the next slide. We've established this through the Book Pen Pal initiative, which is a great scheme that schools can sign up for. We've been paired with Azevedo, who's a great YA author, and she basically sends the students letters, shares recommendations, asks them questions about their reading, and that's provoked some really powerful book talk and book conversations in the classroom. The image on the screen shows a lovely moment from the lockdown when we were all stuck at home, where we had a really great chat on the live lesson, answering some of the questions that Azevedo had set for the children. And that really gave them that rich opportunity to talk about their own reading identities and experiences. Another thing that we've done recently is book tasting, which is an idea that I've magpied from the fantastic examples that are already on the website. I basically brought in a massive stack of picture books. I'm a big advocate of picture fiction in the secondary classroom, and just gave them to the kids to explore, have those conversations. And as you can see from the quotations, they started to develop quite affective responses to the text, which was lovely. They were having that really relaxed conversation and sharing within the class. And they've actually selected, as you can see on the screen, a selection of the books that we're going to explore a bit more together this term, which is fab in terms of them having that agency and that choice over the sort of books that we read together in our reading lessons. This is obviously an ongoing project. It's carrying on every Wednesday morning in our lesson, but I've noticed some really positive shifts in the classroom already. The classroom climate's really starting to change. At the start of the year, lots of the students thought they had to read in silence, they had to be reading novels, they're in secondary school now. But actually, the atmosphere's become a lot more dynamic. There's a lot more informal book chat happening in lessons, lots more bigging up your book, which is everyone's favourite 30 seconds, tell me why this book is the best thing you've ever read in your entire life. Having lots of unprompted book chat in class, which is lovely during independent reading time. Some of the students who previously were very, very disaffected from the reading are now starting to actively seek those opportunities. I think they feel quite empowered that they don't have to read a novel on their own. They can talk about it. They can turn around, point out a favourite page to a friend, and that they can read picture books, magazines, comics, whatever it is that they really want to read. And there's lots more to do. One area I'm going to look at next is iPads. We've all got iPads in the Year 7 groups. How can we use those to further tempt in readers and also develop their reading motivation? So really, it's an ongoing journey and really stands testament, I think, to the power of this research within the secondary classroom.
Thanks, Hannah. Sounded fabulous. Thank you so much. And I'm just dying to get that book, Boundless. I just want it. It's just like I have to buy that.
Yeah, it's the one we're gonna look at tomorrow. So there we go.
Enjoy. Okay, I'm moving down to Cornwall now, from Halzone down to Cornwall, over to Simon Pollard, who's the head teacher there and also OU UKLA teacher reading group leader. Over to you, Simon.
Thanks, Teresa. Thanks for the welcome. It's the first year of running our TRG here in Cornwall. We have almost 40 members from 11 schools. Most of the schools are from one trust, but there are other schools invited as well. And it's been really good having more than one member per school during this online version of TRGs. People can meet face-to-face within their schools, even though they can't all get together. And we've found a lot of senior leaders arriving in the TRG, which has also been great and given a wider support across all the schools and really started to embed things that people are doing in their practice into the schools. Done lots of follow-up in between sessions and lots of check-ins, which people have really appreciated. There's been consistently high online attendance. We're always really pleased that we fixed the face-to-face session for the last one in June. We found a real commonality in practice when we did our first review of practice. Reading communities was the top thing that we all wanted to work on, followed by reading for pleasure pedagogy and EYFS and the secondary, and the primary groups were more evenly spread across the other areas. One of the most popular things this time has been Padlets, and we've set up one for our TRG. Some of the things on the slide here we show that EYFS developing their social reading environments and book talks, and we've got a lot of secondary members as well, and they've set up a staff and student book club, and they've had lots of requests to join. Next slide, please, in the words of Chris Whitty. Reading Rivers have also really helped us to look at children's own reading practice and develop our knowledge of that, and that's happened across all the schools from all different ages. We've had really popular with children recommending reads to each other and really increased children's and staff's knowledge of different texts that are out there. And we're really looking forward to celebrating our examples of practice this year and doing it all again next year. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Simon. It's lovely to hear such energetic practice. And I actually think these photographs were shared in a TRG. So some of them were from the virtual. And I know that some of you have been doing just that. And it's one way of seeing into the window, into other people's classrooms, and then celebrating what you're seeing. So thanks for that. Okay, so we're heading from Cornwall back up to, or not back up to South Lanarkshire, where Susan Brownlee and Michael Wilkie run a TRG there. Over to you, Sue.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. Michael and I run the group for secondary colleagues in South Lanarkshire, but we only began in February, so we're not quite at the stage yet where we're showcasing how people are getting on. Our big challenge when we go face-to-face next year will be the geography of our local authority. The map there, the little green map, shows you Glasgow at the top of South Lanarkshire, but our authority stretches all the way down and borders Dumfries and Galloway and the Scottish borders. So we're going to have to really harness what we learn this year to when we move to face-to-face next year about people being able to attend after school. We have a successful primary group already in South Lanarkshire, and we'll also be using their model to help us move to that. But we have 9 of our 19 secondary schools involved in our first year, and you can see the breakdown there of who's involved and the expertise across that group. We just did our 3rd session last week, and it's such fun. Everybody's having a great time at these. You know, it's nothing like CPD at the end of a day. Everybody's really energized, which is fantastic. Could you move to the next slide? So although Reading for Pleasure is embedded in all our schools already, we've realized looking at our own practice through the TRG and discussion that that's been somewhat mechanistic. And it's fantastic to have people feeling revitalised about reading for pleasure in their classrooms and school libraries, particularly this year. And you can see there that the list of areas that people have decided to focus on. And I think there's going to be some really interesting examples of practice coming out of that, around lots of conversation around reading and children's reading practices, but also teachers being really honest about their requirement, their knowledge of children's literature and young adult text needing to be developed as well. And they're quite excited about ideas around community, because that's something sometimes in secondary we don't get the opportunity to do. And we've already had an expert speaker. We've had one of our group members talk about the Carnegie medal, the shortlist for this year, because she's the chair-elect for 2021, and that's fantastic to get an insight into the processes of that award. And our professional body for teachers in Scotland, the General Teaching Council for Scotland, has accredited the South Lanarkshire programmes for both primary and secondary. So our teachers, if they want to, can put their examples of practice forward once complete, and can, if successful, be accredited with professional recognition in Reading for Pleasure pedagogy, which is fantastic.
Thank you, Susan. I didn't mean to turn you off. Somehow suddenly my screen clicked on. I do apologise. It looks exceptional. Exceptionally rude. Thank you very much, but that's fabulous. It's great to know you're accredited and that you're heading forward with a steam and passion, as indeed Simon's is, and indeed many of the other groups. So I'm stopping sharing for a moment, and I'm going to thank the colleagues who've just shared about their examples of practice, but also about their TRGs, and then hand over to Tom Brassington, who's a TRG leader in Staffordshire, who's going to share some top text, some more top texts with us. So get ready for writing them down and spending your money. Over to you, Tom.
Thanks, Teresa. Great to be with you all this evening. So my first text is a book that I would have devoured as a child. It's called The Curious Book of Lists, and it's by Tracy Turner. I think when we're working with reluctant readers, it's important that we have things that are full of short bursts of reading, things that are going to pique your interest, that people can return to time and time again. And this is that kind of book for me. Whether you want to know about jokes about dogs or proverbs from all around the world, there's historical cures for boldness in there, if that's something you're interested in, and even rulers with unflattering nicknames as well. It's a book that my class absolutely love, and it's never on my shelf. It's always got a child with their nose inside. So I'd really recommend that book. I've promised my class I've got to take it back tomorrow, otherwise I'll be in a lot of trouble. The next one is Kites. It's by Simon Mole, and this is a book about a boy called David who moves to a place called Five Hills, and when he gets there he notices that everybody there flies kites, and he's a little bit jealous, and he realizes if he's going to fit in, that's what he needs to do. He needs to get a kite. And really the book follows David's journey towards acceptance from this new community, and it is such a poetic story about change and resilience and perseverance, and it kind of captures such complex emotions in a beautifully simplistic way. I thought I'd read you a quick page which I thought was just beautiful. Here you can see the images just as David's arrived in Five Hills, and it says, "None of David's things looked quite right in the new house. His favourite books were lonely on the big bookcase. His best cars had forgotten how to drive." And it's just jam-packed, full of those sort of sentences that as an adult break your heart, and as a child really make you think as well. And then finally, this book, While You're Sleeping, is by Mariana Ruiz Johnson. I hope I've kind of pronounced that right. Again, a book that children adore returning to. It was actually the 2015 winner of the Silent Book Contest in Italy. It's a wordless picture book. Again, another great example of how we can get reluctant readers involved without shortchanging them from the discussions that these sort of books can kind of bring about. After a year of lockdown, sort of images of seeing lots and lots of people in their houses locked up, that kind of conjured up a lot of emotions for me and maybe for other people as well. But I think it does what Mariana wants her books to do. She says she wants them to bring people together and remind us about what we have in common. And I think that book does it brilliantly. So they're my three books: Kites, While You Are Sleeping, and The Curious Book of Lists.
Thanks, Tom. I'm definitely going to buy 2 of those, and I'm not going to share which one you didn't tempt me on. 2 out of 3 he tempted me. How much money are we going to spend this evening? And I need to read another Elizabeth Azevedo that Abina had recommended. Okay, so now we're going to hand over to John Biddle, who's going to introduce our guest tonight, Marcia Williams. We're delighted to have you. I'm not going to take John's space, so I'm going to quit speaking, and thank you.
Thank you, Teresa. It is an absolute massive privilege to introduce author and illustrator Marcia Williams this evening. If I'm being honest, her books have been a staple in my classroom for at least the past 20 years. She's written and illustrated over 30 books, which cover a wide range of subjects and genres, and has won numerous awards for her writing, including the UKLA Book Award in 2009, I think, for Archie's War, and more recently the English 4 to 11 picture book for Stone Age Hunters, Gatherers and Woolly Mammoths. Hello, Marcia, and I really do appreciate you being here tonight. Thank you. I mean, for several years, you were probably best known for your graphic cartoon strips, I suppose, which I'm holding up, which depict different periods in history and your sort of retellings of myths and legends. The Robin Hood one is a particular favourite of mine. I've read that numerous times with classes. Do you have a particular favourite? And also, are there any other gaps in the series that you would like to fill one day?
It's always hard to choose a favourite. I'm also very fond of Robin Hood, because I wrote that for my son When my son was 4 years old, he went to school dressed as Robin Hood every day. And his best friend Harry went dressed as Little John. And they were completely passionate about it. And so that's really why I wrote that book. And I think the Greek myths I'm always drawn to. I just love those Greek gods and the heroes. And in fact, I'm doing another book about Greek heroes at the moment. And I'm loving that. And it's very hard. I'm very fond of the Shakespeare books. I don't have one here to show you.
Luckily, I do.
Okay. Fantastic. Well, if you open it up. So when I started doing the Shakespeare book, it was really hard because I wanted to make them not like stories, but like, which they are, of course, but they're also plays. And I wanted to give that feeling that it was a performance. And I was lucky because they were just building the New Globe Theatre, and I visited there, and I realized how much a part the audience was of the performances in Elizabethan times. And so that gave me the idea of putting the audience around the edge of the page. Okay. And that also, it can support the reader, because if the text is quite tricky, or the concept of the story, then you can have somebody in the audience explaining it in a sort of offside way. And so I'm like those books, but I just love doing the books. So, you know.
I think we love reading them and sharing them as well. I mean, that's, they have been in classrooms for a long time, and they still get read and they still get enjoyed. Moving on, and I know a lot of people have read this, and there's a lot of fans of this out there. I think it was your first or your debut as a novelist in 2019, Cloudboy. And as well as focusing on the friendship between the two main characters, Harry and Angie, one of the things it does is explores life in the Changi prison during the Second World War, which, if I'm being honest, was a topic I knew nothing about until I read the book. And you actually met, I believe, and interviewed Olga Morris, who was incarcerated in the camp. I mean, what was it like to meet her, and how did it impact on the book and the writing?
It was amazing to meet her. I mean, she's hugely generous with her memories. And so it came about because I saw, while they were in Changi jail, one of the awful things was boredom, particularly for the children. And so one of the adults started a guide group, and the children loved her. And they decided, I think it was her birthday coming up, and they decided to make her a quilt. The guides, there were about 14 guides ranging from 7 to 12. And they had nothing there. I mean, there was, in fact, Olga's mother was the only person who'd brought needles into the jail. And nobody had any thread, and nobody had any fabric. So to make this quilt, they had to unpick their clothes for the thread and then cut bits off their hem and beg and borrow little bits. But anyway, I went to this quilt exhibition at the V&A, and I saw this quilt they'd made, and it was like quarter of the size of every other quilt, and it was faded and, you know, obviously made by children. And it was really heart-wrenching to think, because they weren't allowed to meet in groups. So if they got caught, then the guards were quite violent. So it was scary for them. And so I asked the person who had organized the exhibition if I could meet somebody, and she introduced me to Olga. And really, Olga just told me from day to day how it was for her. And when I met her, I was also writing this other book about the two children and the amazing support young people give each other when times are tough. And of course, it was the same. That was a contemporary, you know, two children from now. And it was the same in Changi prison. The children did support each other in the most amazing way. And so I began to realize that these two stories were actually linked, but I couldn't find a way of linking them because it was a huge time span. And then again, I went and met a friend for coffee, and she was living in Hong Kong, and she had her little daughter with her who was about 6, and she was really bored with us. So she was writing on the computer a letter to her kitten at home. And she was, writing, "Dearest Popsy, I miss you so much." And she really believed that the kitten was going to get this letter and enjoy it. And so that gave me the idea that the Olga character in Changi would, while she was in Changi, write to her kitten. And that was then a link, so she could then read those letters to her great-grandchildren later on. And so her experiences, I suppose, support their experiences in a way.
Yeah, I know, I agree. And I think one of the things that really resonates is the increasing desperation in the letters that she's writing to her kids.
Yes,
and as the story develops, and where it's. I think it's an amazing piece.
Well, she is amazing, and all the people there, especially as children, have ongoing health problems, and she has rickets and finds it hard to walk and things. But there's no bitterness. So she's an amazing character. I was very lucky to meet her.
Yeah, thank you, and for sharing. If you haven't read it, please, do get a copy. It really is a special book, and it's probably one of my favourite books of the last 2 or 3 years, I think. I think it was last year. You published a book called "Children Who Changed the World," and again, this is based around some incredible true stories based on achievements of children and child activists. When I read it, a lot of the stories really kind of resonated with me, but were there any that particularly affected you, and how easy was it to choose which stories to put in and which stories not to include?
It was really, really difficult. I mean, there are hundreds of amazing children who do incredible things and who are very, very brave. I think I partly chose them because it's about child rights. So every story illustrates a different right. So that helped me in a way. And then I tried to choose children of different ages and from different backgrounds, different countries. And I think it's, having a favorite, it's like having a favorite child. You can't really do that. But the person that really resonated with me was a little child from Pakistan, Iqbal Masih, and he was, I think he illustrates the right not to work as a child, and he was sold into bonded labour when he was 4 years old.
Yeah, I remember that one.
And his family were incredibly poor, and he worked for a carpet manufacturer, and during the day, these children were actually chained to the loom, so they couldn't go anywhere, and they were underfed so that their fingers stayed small enough to tie the knots. And you just can't, even begin to imagine what it must have been like for a 4-year-old. And at 10, he escaped, and but he was caught again. A policeman took him back to the owner of the factory and advised the owner to hang him up by his feet, and then he wouldn't run away again. But he did, and he managed to get to a charity, and they educated him. And his great ambition was to become a lawyer so he could help other children escape from bonded labour. And during that time, while he was being educated and getting ready to study as a lawyer, he would campaign against bonded labour and saved over 3,000 children, I think, from it. but then he was murdered, and it's just so, you know, it's what a devastating life. But you know, he fought for other children, and that's the incredible thing. I think that was one of the themes, was that a lot of these children have suffered terrible deprivation and cruelty, and yet when their life changes, they want to help other children.
Yes, yeah, the legacy that a lot of them left or are leaving is huge, isn't it? And I think that one did stand out in terms of its emotional impact. There are some wonderful stories, and it's happened. And what I really liked about the book is how you included stories not just from the modern day, but from over the last several hundred years as well. And I think that's, you know, it's always happened, hasn't it? You know, through history. Thank you. Your next book I don't actually have with me. I don't think it's actually officially been released yet.
Oh, I think I've got the only copy. I have got.
Perfect. Thank you. It's called The Fantastic Book of Feelings, and again, I think your timing is perfect, because with everything that's going on in the world at the moment, with COVID and climate change and everything else that's happening, you know, it does feel like this is the time for this book. Can you tell us more about it and why you wrote it, and what you're hoping the impact of it will be?
Yes, so I didn't write it because of COVID. I didn't even, you know, there was no thought of a pandemic when I started the book. I think I wanted to write it because I worked for a while with a charity called the Art Room, and they did a lot of work with children who were about to be excluded from school. And I worked for a whole term with a group of children. And anyway, going into schools, you realize how, you know, how many children have problems controlling some of their deeper emotions and don't know where to put them, and or understand, you know, that it's all right to have emotions, but you don't actually want them messing up your life and preventing you from following your dreams. And so I just wanted to write a book and join the general conversation. I mean, you talked about Empathy Day, for instance, and, you know, if you can't organize your own emotions, you certainly aren't going to be empathetic to other people's. And so I wanted to write a book that taught children about, you know, that's fine to have emotions, and here are some ways to look after them. So I was lucky because I don't, you know, I don't know enough to write this book without support. So I had a consultant psychologist who helped me with the stories. And so each of the main emotions are talked about in story form and with the child, and they're all based on true stories, but obviously completely changed, but there's truth there. And how these children, you know, one child here, we've got Alicia, who suffers from anxiety, and the story tells you how she managed to take control of her anxiety and use it more positively. And then at the back, there is a first aid box for your emotions, and actually Walker Books have also are putting on online resources so that children can download different ideas of how they can support their emotions and create their own first aid boxes of things that they find useful, because we all find different things. You know, some people like to meditate, others for a run, whatever. And so it's just really to open the conversation, I think. And, you know, feelings are great, but you want to use them positively.
How you manage them. I imagine pre-orders of it have gone through the roof in the last 10 minutes. It looks like an absolute essential for the classroom. Thank you. My next question is kind of a very short one, really, I suppose. What's next? What stories have you still got to tell?
Oh, I don't know. Every time I think I'm getting, you know, I think I'm never going to find anything else to write about. There is always something. And as I said, I'm doing Greek myths again, which I never thought, you know, I'd find more myths to write about, but you do. And I haven't done the Shakespeare history plays, so I quite like to do those. And I mean, there are just wonderful myths and legends all over the world, you know, that I haven't even touched on, from places like China and Ireland, even Wales, you know.
Have you ever touched on the Norse myths at all?
So no, not really. No, I did a book about, no, not really. There are those.
Yeah, so you've still got lots of work ahead of you then.
Yes, I have.
Okay. And I know one of the things that children's writers love to do is to read books by other children's writers. I mean, which books have stood out for you over the past couple of years, and are there any authors around that you're really excited about, that you really enjoy?
Oh, well, I love Oliver Jeffers, so I love all his books. I particularly like Lost and Found. I haven't got a copy of that here, but I love all his books. He's a wonderful artist, and I love the simplicity of his books and the way there's so much. I think Tom showed some books that sort of have a similar theme in their simplicity. You know, they have so many layers, and I love that. And this is my book of my lockdown book. I don't know if you've seen this one. So this was created during the pandemic, and it's the Book of Hopes, and it's edited by Catherine Rundell, who's a wonderful author, which I'm sure you all know. And so she collected together over 100 authors and illustrators, and they've all written stories, poems, drawn pictures, all on the theme of hope, to cheer children up who've struggled during lockdown. And it's a lovely book because it sort of is for all ages. It's for adults and children. And so some of it's just very funny, some of it's very touching, but there's, you know, everybody there, Jacqueline Wilson, Michael Morpurgo, all those.
Amazing range.
Yes. And another book that I've found recently, and I really like, Poems to Live By, and they're collected by Chris Riddell, and also have got his amazing illustrations in them. And I like this one because there are new poems in it, but there are also all the Jabberwocky and the ones, you know, that I've always loved.
Yeah.
And so that's another one. I could go on. You want another one?
Time for one more.
So,
I hear you talk about them all night, to be honest.
this is the one I'm reading at the moment. Everybody else has probably read this one because it's I think it was a winner of the Waterstones Children's Book Prize, and it's The Girl of Ink and Stars, and it's magical. It's very magical, and I haven't got very far, but it's about a girl who can follow the stars and create maps, read maps, and she lives on an island that once moved but doesn't move anymore, and part of it is forbidden, and she has to go into the forbidden area. And it's a lovely book.
A definite future classic, I think.
Yes,
a lot of everything she writes is, really, to be honest. I actually can't believe we're already running out of time. I've got one last question for you, Marcia. Everybody, I imagine, sitting in this meeting this evening, or I know, is a huge advocate for reading for pleasure. And I believe that you were involved in education. You were a teacher before you became a writer. Yeah. And I guess my last question is, what does reading for pleasure mean to you? And what would you suggest to help schools build that reading culture?
Oh, well, I mean, reading to me is sort of like breathing. I think my mother was a writer and an addicted reader. And I think that came to me, luckily. And so particularly in lockdown, I mean, it was everything. For part of lockdown, I was completely alone for about 2 months. And so reading, you know, books were my friends, my entertainment, my meals out, my travel, everything, you know. And I think, I don't know, I am a huge advocate of reading aloud. And when I was at school, when I was at school, we had this teacher who was absolutely terrifying, and she was called Miss Duncan, and everybody was scared of her. She was always angry, and she walked with a stick, and you could hear her stick tapping towards you, and you'd scarp her. But on rainy days, she would invite whoever wanted into her classroom and read aloud, and it was magic. And I think she gave me my love of books more than anyone, and brought books alive to me. So I think reading aloud and sharing your enthusiasm is...
I think that's a perfect way to end as well. Thank you. Thank you so much for your time. I'm speaking on behalf of everybody here, but I absolutely love listening to you speak. Thank you. It's been an absolute treat. I'm going to hand back to Teresa. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, John and Marcia. That was just so fascinating. I'm desperately trying to tweet you saying reading is breathing, but I didn't quite have time. It's sitting there waiting to be pressed in a minute. So just brilliant. Thank you very much indeed. If we might invite everybody to put on their gallery view, then our hope was that everyone could grab a book, whatever is your absolute fave, and we can do the biggest book wave with 158 people who began and who've stayed. Now, doesn't that a credit to Marcia and the others, wherever your book is to wave? Massive book wave. If you want to kind of go on, there are 7 screens. So if anybody's in the room and can take photographs, Rich or Hannah or anybody else can take snaps as we go, that would be marvelous. If you scroll to the next screen, you can see what else is anybody promoting. So go for it. John's got Cloud Boy up in his hands. I can see the Velveteen Rabbit, the Fox, the Girl and the White Gazelle. I know not. It looks good, Joanne. Thank you. Different title, nodding. Scroll yourself on to see somewhere else so you can see somebody else. The Stars Are Scattered is getting a good, when Stars Are Scattered, it's getting a good showing tonight. Debbie's taking some photographs. Thank you, Debbie. Hold it still, everybody. The Gilded, what is it? The Gilded Ones. That looks just fascinating. Thank you. Whoever that is, I don't know that one. Go and see if you can collect another. Here's Isabel with Coming to England, Floella Benjamin. That looks a good one. Edgar and the Sausage. I'm just calling out randomly a bit, but Scott, hi Scott, nice to have you with us. Arctic Star down there in the corner. And then my second to last screen, You Choose, The Wild Robot, yeah. And there's the Further Adventures of the Wild Robot too, for those people who wish. And a lot of people who are just watching rather than sharing. That's great. Lovely to see everybody. We've just got one item left. We're in excellent time, whether that's me being Mrs. Harassing everyone. I apologize if I was, but I was trying to keep us on time to get last item. In our newsletter, we normally start with Lucy doing hello and introduction, then we get some top text in terms of that we get an introduction, we get some news, some top text, we get examples of practice. We always have an author in the spotlight, so thank you, Marcia, for being just that. And we always have, in the very last item, I never know whether anybody clicks on it, to be honest, because it goes out to other people's websites, but it's a research item. And I work very hard trying to find gold open access so that we put a line there that any teacher or consultant, whatever, can click on and get to read, because so much of it is hidden behind university walls. So there's just one piece of news about a piece of research which the OU team are taking part in, and I thought you might be interested in, particularly as there's been a kind of strong emphasis around picture fiction tonight. So I'm just before you go and put the kettle on, or you get another glass of wine. I've drunk all mine, damn it. So that'll be another one of those. A new research project. It's entitled, perhaps appositely, Overcoming Adversity Through Hope, Developing Dialogue Through Picture Fiction. And a team of us, Sarah Jane Mackenzie, Lucy Rodriguez-Leon, Dana Thorova, and the brilliant picture book man, Rich Charlesworth, who's been behind the scenes tonight. Thank you, Rich, doing lots of messages in the chat. We've been working together and through multimodal analysis of both the visuals and of the texts, and some ace picture fiction that reflects children's diverse lives. We've been trying to develop a kind of focused framework that will help practitioners and help parents selecting, reading and discussing books that centre on social and emotional challenges. So we're not just trying to make a list and say, here's a brilliant list, because there are a lot of people giving us lots of recommendations for brilliant lists, including Empathy Lab, we've mentioned before. But this particular kind of piece of work is a research analysis. We started with 150 picture fiction. Marilyn Brocklehurst sent them to us. We identified them in various ways. We're now down to 30, kind of 10 for Key Stage 1, 10 for lower Key Stage 2 and 10 for upper Key Stage 2. And we hope that we intend the framework will focus on book talk and on reading together, just as you were saying, Marcia, about reading to and reading with, both teachers reading to kids and parents reading to their children, in ways that trigger and support young people's well-being and provide a kind of relaxed space, the kind of space Claire was providing in her class, and indeed Hannah too, that enables us to support and explore those sensitive issues, those issues that build affective connection, affinity between two readers in that context or a class of readers, and build supportive relationships. So that kind of bonding, connecting reading, but also dealing with difficulty, dealing with adversity, not dealing with it ticket, but dealing with it, opening it, exploring it, seeking to understand it better. So that's what we're trying to work on. It's been fascinating, and Sarah and Rich have done far more than Lucy and I so far, and there's a fabulous framework which is kind of a visual representation of how far we've got. So later on in the year you'll hear more about it when we've kind of able to present our data, as it were, present our argument around what is it we understand these books to offer and what kind of tools pedagogically we might use as a profession to nudge us into having those kind of conversations about books like perhaps No Money Payday, books perhaps like, I'm trying to stretch for one, Felix After the Rain, for example, and many, many more, Wisp and others you'll know. So do look out for it. Lubna and Pebble, I think, has got it to the last 30, but there have been so many, it is confusing as to which finally got there. But I'm stopping now because it's about 2 minutes to. It's time for us all to zoop down and get another drink. But thank you very much for joining us, each person who spoke. Particularly thank you to Sarah behind the scenes, and have a good evening, everybody. And we're glad to have you as members of teacher reading groups right around the country. And we're glad that this is beginning to make a difference, nudge into action more conversations with other readers, young and older, so that we move our reading on and our understanding of reading on, and we help the kids, because that's what we're here for. So thanks very much. Safe, I can't say safe journey home. I keep trying not to say that in meetings. We haven't got a home to go to, we're in it already. And some of us have never left the flaming place. So you lucky teachers have managed to go to a school, and I know that's an ironic sentence in a way. So I'm going to zip my lips, and good trip down the stairs if you're up the stairs, or into the kitchen, or round the corner, whatever. Have a good evening.